You're listening to Not So Live from Asteroid G. I'm Mike Finkelstein. With me in the booth, as always, is...
The horror buddy, Mike. How you guys doing this week?
Hey. So we are going to be discussing horror, because horror buddy. The Nightmare on Elm Street series. We've gone through most of the slasher series at this point, the major ones anyway. I'm sure we could probably dig up one or two more. But the one that we haven't touched upon yet is the one that, in some ways, I feel like is maybe the most divisive in just from certain perspectives. Like it's a you love it or you hate it, and if you hate it, it's the exact same reason why other people really love it. And it's the Nightmare on Elm Street series, and that's all because of Freddy.
Freddy, one of the Mount Rushmore, I guess, of your slashers that we've talked about, belongs on there, absolutely. And I think early on, thinking about some of these first couple movies, he was genuinely, I think, a bit scary. It's when they kind of leaned into the hamminess of him a little bit, and like the movies injected more comedy than actual horror, that he kind of just lost his punch for me, honestly.
Well, I think it's the thing of his original movie was created by Wes Craven, and Wes Craven is, as everyone will acknowledge, a master of horror. He gets to put that on his business card, or he did until he died, which is sad now.
On his tombstone.
If he comes back and continues handing out business cards, I believe he will have earned Master of Horror at that point.
Agreed.
But so as a master of horror, he knew how to craft scares, and the original Nightmare on Elm Street is a very scary movie. The other one that he did in the main series, Dream Warriors, is a little more comedic, but there's still really good scares and ambiance and vibe to it, and that's what Wes Craven brought to it. Everyone else who came to it saw, well, Freddy is iconic, let's focus on Freddy, whether it's in the script or the direction or whatever. And so they emphasized him more as a character than as a shape, as a presence.
Right. And, Wes Craven, created this, straight monster right here. And, we'll get to, New Nightmare, which I think is one of Freddy's finer works, honestly. I think that's one of the best, if not the best, aside from the original. We had the sequel discussion before as well. And I would say this one rivals the scariness of the first one, in my opinion. But just really, Wes Craven, shout out. Great, man. You will be missed.
He will indeed. He contributed to some of the best horror movies that are out there. And I mean, we could do an entire podcast just discussing everything he's made, his good and his bad, because not everything's a winner. But I mean, when you take the fact that he did, the Nightmare on Elm Street, all the good ones, and that's three of these main seven, and then the Scream movies of varying qualities, but that first one is still a masterful movie all on its own. Like, that cements his legacy before you even take into account anything else that he's done.
For sure. So, getting on the topic of the actual movies, let's talk about the first one here. Yes. So, the original Nightmare on Elm Street. November
watching Johnny Depp die, and that's all you really care about, just watching Johnny Depp die. That's it. We can move on now.
One of the vicious deaths.
It was
in the movie. I think that pool of blood I still see in my nightmares.
That the spray of it from the middle of the bed. Yeah, it's something for sure.
Yeah,
but it's interesting because it does definitely defy the conventions that came into effect, even from like the second movie and onwards, when Freddy became a real character. He follows in the guise of the other vicious monsters of the time period, the Michael Myers and the Jason Voorhees, even though he came out like a couple years later, so he got to stand in a different bit of territory there. Like watching the series evolve, and Wes Craven came in to like put his own stamp on the matter, so to speak. But then that's part of the reason why Freddy gets to talk, which the other major shapes do not. And like you can see the people who watch it going, we could do more of this, and they make Chucky, and Chucky is just a fucking like foul-mouthed little asshole, and it's great. But like that comes from Freddy, like adding a talking villain into the whole thing instead of all the presences that just stand there and look menacing. And that was different at the time, because then you got personality from him.
Yeah, I was gonna say personality, not presence.
Yes.
Good choice of words right there. Definitely, he's very loquacious and verbose. If you want to pull out some thesaurus words right there.
A gregarious killer.
Yeah, he monologues. He likes to draw your fear out and show how much power he has over you when you're in his world.
Eventually, his early kills are definitely much more shape than presence.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like even in this first movie, the first couple that he does before he really starts taunting Heather Langenkamp's character, like
Mm-hmm.
Nancy, that's her name. Like he's definitely like a presence, a force, a mysterious something before he
Mm-hmm.
really gets going.
And I think that's by design, obviously, as well, because like you don't know this character. You can't just like, introduce him as some slapsticky monologuing
Yeah.
gruesome vicious killer. You got to like set it up a little bit with some actual death to kind of get the consequence in there. And Freddy, I think, and it's not going on a limb to say he's got the best personality, I think, out of all of the slashers, considering he has the most. Maybe Chucky, you can say, has quite a good personality as well. But Freddy just like, he does bring something that the others don't, and I think that does set him apart. And after rewatching a couple of these when I knew we were doing it, and I'm sour on Freddy for the most part.
Yeah,
I don't think I gave him enough credit initially. I will say that.
Well, it depends on when you approach it, because it is something to be said for the fact that only the first movie, well, and its remake, really tries to pretend that Freddy is any kind of mysterious killer, this strange beast that comes in someone's dreams, and everyone else only sees the after effects of it, the body getting dragged up onto the wall and ceiling, mysteriously getting slashed and dying, Johnny Depp's character getting sucked into a bed and then exploding in a river of blood, which, I mean, no one's sad about that one. But things like that, which, the real world effects are different. Because after this movie, they start being like, well, we can draw him out into the real world. And it changes everything. And plus, the mystery's gone. You know who he is after the first movie. Even the remake can't touch that because, like, you're sitting there going, well, yeah, it's a remake, but you're not changing anything. And we know exactly what you're doing with him. He's still this guy.
Yeah, and you can't, like, really, you can't put a different stamp on this character than he already has. So you gotta roll with what you got, and what you got is this presence, this shadow that turns into this thing that pulls you into dreams and just slashes you.
Which is scary looking. I mean, he's a grotesquerie when he's first revealed, and the blades are quite scary without any context.
Yeah, I remember when I was very young, and I think I can't remember which movie it was, what number, because I was too young to remember. But I remember seeing it come on HBO, and it was the very beginning, so it was like the intro in, and I remember seeing them put the glove on, and then the blades come out of the hands, and like the blood dripping down, and I'm like, what is this movie? I'm like 5 years old, and this is already terrifying. So I do have that vision of my childhood of Freddy, and I wish I knew which one that was. I can't quite remember.
It's got to be one of the middle ones. It's got to be like 4 or 5. I can't remember which one. I remember the scene you're talking about, but I've only watched through the whole series once because the later ones get real ass. Like, if I'm going to go and run the series, I'm doing 1, 3, and 7 and then skipping.
And then talking about 1, 3, and 7, I kind of like 2 for what it is.
2's
I think
weird.
It's a neat idea, I guess. Freddy, after being defeated in the first one, trying to find a way to come back, tries to possess another teenager to do the job for him, and kind of like, showing a different measure of power that he has, a control over these teenagers, which I think is a neat idea. Definitely, it's a very kind of a campy movie compared to the first one, but it's definitely like an interesting concept, I think, because like it kind of sets up some of the things Freddy does in some of his other movies of the being able to like kind of work his maliciousness through other people, and try to like get them to do the job for him, like he does in a movie that we've already talked about at some point that we're going to leave out here. But he a bit of the puppet master aspect of it, not just like the actual brute force.
Yeah, well, and there's this thing about the second movie. I'm not a huge fan of the second movie. I think the second movie is terrible. Partially for the reasons that you basically listed, which is it feels very out of place in comparison to the first one. Freddy's powers are very different. And, if you're watching them in order, you're going to be like, there's a bit of puristness there. Don't retcon new ways the killer can do things in without any kind of explanation, which this movie doesn't bother doing. It doesn't care. And it's very campy. Now, it's a campiness that I think if it was in a different movie with like the same basic story, but in a different series, its own movie, I think it'd be better. Because it's interesting to note, and this is not a knock against the film, it has a very homoerotic vibe to it with the way that some of the kills play out. The coach getting stripped naked and slapped and then killed, and like the way that Freddy approaches the boy that he's stalking this whole time to take him over. It's very upfront about where some of its leanings lie, and I don't hate that.
Right.
It's actually an interesting angle because you don't get a lot of gay slasher killers, and I think
Right.
that's really interesting to have that perspective this early in the franchise. I just don't think it really blends in with the franchise, which very distinct rules about like final girls and what his motivations are and everything else, you know?
Yeah, you can almost say this was like one of the few that had like final boy, I guess,
Yes.
with Jesse.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an interesting take. I can appreciate it for what it is. It's
Mm-hmm.
definitely one of the weaker entrances of the
Mm-hmm.
franchise. But I mean, as a
It tried.
sequel, it did try.
It did try.
I'll give it that.
It wasn't just the same movie over again, which is to its
Right.
credit. But then, I mean, when you look at the third movie, which doesn't do the same movie again, even as it brings Heather Langenkamp back for Nancy to do something else, it finds a new angle without really violating the rules of the first movie in most respects.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
like, it also just completely ignores the second movie.
Yeah, and talking about the third one now, because that's where we are. That's like one of my favorites of the franchise as well.
Dream
I remember
Warriors.
I saw this when I was too young again to see it because my grandparents had HBO. But I definitely I remember just the whole the kid from the wheelchair that Freddy was puppeteering off the building and pulling him out by his veins, and the girl
Yeah,
who's
that was
the drug
gross.
addict like trying to slash him up with some scalpels, and Freddy's knives turn into hypodermic needle syringes. Just very coming after all these characters in the movie, but their greatest fears, and it's really kind of lays into Freddy really being that master of fear, I think, in this movie. And it's got some campiness to it. Sure, this is where they really start leaning into Freddy calling everybody bitch, but at the same time, I think for what it is, this is definitely a strong point in the franchise's this film.
It is. It has a lot going for it, and a lot of its ideas are really well constructed. And it doesn't put a lot of emphasis on emphasizing the characters of the children that he's going to kill, which is very
Yeah.
important. Like you go back and you look at like the second one, whose subtitle I can't even remember. He's like it's even the characters that you kind of know, like the coach, are still very stereotyped. They're very simple. Whereas the
Yeah.
characters here in Dream Warriors actually get some depth to them before they get killed off one by one. It's much more interesting in that respect. It's very much like the work that he would do, Wes Craven would do on his other movies, such as Scream, where
Mhm.
everyone that dies has a distinct personality and you know them. You're not killing the random extras in the background, you're killing the named characters.
Yeah, you started you felt and again, these were some very young actors and actresses at the time. But I mean, a young Lawrence Fishburne as Larry Fishburne,
Yep,
you
before he
wouldn't you
changed it.
wouldn't yeah, you wouldn't think that if you thought now, well, he's Fishburne's in a movie, he's not dying, but he goes. Patricia Arquette in the movie as well. Definitely some star value, I think, in a tier B / horror movie right here with some of these people, what they ended up doing later on in life. Very interesting. And just this is really good job in this movie, I think, with Freddy just, appearing menacing again compared to the second one.
Mm-hmm. It's also interesting to note that Patricia Arquette is in here during her star power phase, while the Arquette from the Scream series had to grow into his David Arquette because he was definitely the lesser Arquette when cast. So
Right. Once upon a time, right?
once upon a time, these roles were very reversed here, guys. But there's a long line of Arquette starring in slasher flicks because what was it? Bride of Chucky had another one of the Arquettes, Alexis Arquette, who played the guy that the Tiffany kills early in that film. Arquettes and slash movies apparently go together. Look at that. So
yeah, and it started in the 80s. So 40 years of Arquettes and slashers.
So, and I gotta say, as much as the next few are weaker, I don't necessarily hate The Dream Master, which is the fourth film. It tries to build a connected trilogy, sort of like what the Halloweens did with 4 to 5 and originally 6 until they changed that idea. 6 is just a mess in the Halloween series. Oh my god.
Yeah,
oh my god.
Yeah.
But yeah, they did a connective plot line from the girl in the asylum getting sent home for 4, and then Freddy kills her, but she passes her Dream Warrior power onto her friend in this fourth movie. And then the fifth movie, Dream Child picks up with her again, and she's pregnant, and Freddy's trying to use her sleeping child, which connects back to the second movie, using a sleeping person to break into the real world. There's some weird mythology building, but a lot of interesting stuff. And I feel like as far as extending it in a direct sequel, which the series hadn't done before, Dream Master at least does a better job than anything else in the franchise.
Yeah, I agree with that, and it's definitely a pretty some good kills in this movie. I like the this really. You have Michael Myers with Jamie Lee Curtis's character and whatnot, and to not much in the Friday the 13th series. You get callbacks to previous movies, good or bad, with these characters. There's a real theme in this franchise of kind of just sticking with the Elm Street part of this, people in this one area being affected by what's going on, which I can really appreciate.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and you're right. The kills are better here, although they're starting to feel kind of B tier in comparison. Like, there's nothing as potent as the glove coming up, almost killing Nancy in the bathtub, or that gout of blood for Johnny Depp, which I'm never going to stop emphasizing because it's hilarious.
I believe when they did that too, like they filmed it and just had the film upside down, and so the blood would come out that way, and like you can see it. But I mean, as a kid, boy, did that affect you.
There's a lot of simple techniques in that first movie that work well, like Freddy pushing his way through the wall to like hang over Heather Langenkamp's character, and it's just like a latex wall painted like wallpaper. It's so simple, and you notice it when it happened. Like now that you know, but when you first saw it the first time, you're like, "Oh my god, that's disturbing."
Yeah, really great use of practical effects. I think and there's some great movies out there that use practical effects very well, and this is no exception. I think there's some really good stuff in there.
Dream Child, though, is a complete piece of trash. Not only for terrible kills, like the one where he like stuffs a girl until he dies, and some other dumbass shit in there, the Roach Motel and stuff. Like, that was him at high camp mode, where it's every kill has to be a joke, and it's not about the characters, it's about Freddy. And then the whole thing with him, like, not only possessing the child in her belly, but also her meeting the child who's like the 7-year-old now, just that she can meet, and Freddy being the spawn of a nun raped by 1,000 patients. Like, there's too much going on in this stupid movie.
Yeah, there's a lot of you feel like they're trying to maybe tie up some loose ends here and really connect everything together. And while I was praising that in the previous movie, this is where you're tightening strings a little too much, I think.
Yeah, no, it's retcons for the sake of retcons, and like just layering story on top of story. And like, don't get me wrong, Freddy needed a little bit of story to explain why he was killing the Elm Street kids, but you get that in the first movie, and then kind of reemphasized in the third one. He was killed by the parents of the Elm Street ones because Freddy was going after their children, and now he's stalking their children in dreams. You know what? That right there, that single PowerPoint slide, that's all we need. We don't need to know how he was conceived or who his mother was or anything. That doesn't have any bearing on the fact that he's a fucked up dude who likes to kill children, okay? That's all we needed.
Yeah, taking pleasure out of torturing, kids, and particularly little girls, even at that. So I mean, this guy, he's vicious enough by trying, without trying to interject something else in there. And it was an attempt. It was an attempt. I'll leave it at that.
It was an attempt. An attempt was made. The meme. Yeah. 5 is bad. 6 is just as bad, maybe worse. Like, I'm torn on which one is better or worse. 6, it has the unfortunate thing of like supposedly tying off the franchise. Freddy's Dead is the name of it, while also working in completely unnecessary 3D effects. So unnecessary to the point that if you watch the movie without 3D glasses on a 2D transfer, you don't even know where the 3D was supposed to have been put in, because it's just so unobtrusive that it doesn't feel like they needed 3D at all. And the kills are terrible. Like, the movie loses me at the very first kill, where a kid one of the teens flies in an airplane, or like it's a dream. I'm going to be honest with you, I can barely remember this movie because it's so boring. And then like the kid falls out of the plane, and Freddy slowly pushes in a mattress with nails in it so the kid lands on it, and I'm like, what is this? Isn't stalking, and this is not you being a shape. This is you being an Acme cartoon character.
Yeah, a lot of like Wile E. Coyote feels.
Yes,
it was. This is peak Freddy humor. I guess I'd call it,
quote unquote. Yeah.
It works in some instances. In this movie, it doesn't do it for me.
No, this is trash.
I don't care that much about the characters in this movie either, compared to the other ones. I guess you could say you care about Freddy because he's Freddy, but I have no attachment to any of these other people. And you're trying but no.
Whatever attachment I had to Freddy went out the window in the previous film when he was given a backstory I didn't need. Like, at that point, if you're going to continue maintaining this continuity, I'm kind of out. I'm checked out at the very minimum. But, like, yeah, it's that sequence with the bed and everything that comes after. If it had been done as a Saturday morning cartoon, it wouldn't have felt any more out of place. In fact, it might have worked better because at least then we have context for why he's acting so stupid, you know?
Yeah, this felt very made for TV when it came out, and it was not, and maybe it should have been.
It takes the franchise until Wes Craven came back. It was like, you know what? We're going to ditch everything, and we're going to do this again. By doing a very meta movie about the filming of a Nightmare on Elm Street series entry with Heather Langenkamp coming back, and it just, like, it's so weird that it kind of just works on its own without any context.
Okay, so this movie came out 94,
New
was
Nightmare?
Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and then 96 was Scream. I was curious, I couldn't remember when
he was
Scream
playing
came
in that realm.
Yeah, you could feel like, you know, the stab aspect of Scream in this movie. And I was wondering what inspired the other, and it was Freddy, and I'm glad, actually, because he should have come first.
Oh, yeah, no, this is absolutely a proto-Scream. This is like Wes doing this movie, and then when, like, Kevin Williamson's script floats past Dimension Films, they're like, you know who did a movie just like this? Do you think he might be interested in doing another one?
Yeah, and it's funny. I'm looking at, like, the Wikipedia here of all the nightmares, and, like, you look at, like, the New Nightmare and directed by screenwriter, story by Wes Craven, just across the board right there, and you can tell this movie, and it doesn't have. Yeah, it doesn't have great numbers if you want to be like, box office, like, meta kind of thing. You know? It only garnered less than 20 million, but this movie is scary. This movie has garnered a cult following in the years since it's, come out, and I think it's well deserved. This feels like probably the strongest entry of the franchise compared to the first one.
Well, it has vision. And I think
exactly.
It's doing something different. And that's something that needs to be rewarded in horror movies. Once you've done something in a horror movie, it's hard to get the scares again because all you're doing is redoing the same thing. That's why we go on and on about how good the first Halloween is and then have meh feelings about everything that came afterwards. Because how do you reinvent it if you're still going to maintain that? The credit again goes to John Carpenter for realizing the gas was running out of the tank with Halloween 2, and they tried to do something different for Halloween 3. They didn't do a good job of it. There's no defending that. But the idea of being like, let's just make an anthology, and they do this with the Nightmare series. They give the Freddy's Tales or whatever the fuck it was called, a TV series. That, by the way, I tried to watch it. It's wretched. Don't go watch it. It's really bad. But
I'd forgotten that was even a thing. Oh my god.
It's really bad. Freddy's Nightmares, maybe that was what it was called. I don't know. Anyway,
something like that.
It was terrible because the production value was not good, and you could tell no one that actually cared about the series was involved. But when you go to a movie like New Nightmare, it takes the meta concept of they're making a Nightmare on Elm Street, and because of that, Freddy is using it as a way to break out into the real world and kill the people making the movie instead of just killing kids in the movie. Like, that's a twist that works. And because it's not set in the same quote-unquote world, you can suddenly just have, like, all kinds of new rules, and it feels fair for once.
Yeah, I agree. Really great job in this movie. Getting back to its roots of horror. Like just the claw, like even like creeping around and taking on like almost an emphasis of its own. With Freddy controlling it and you can't see him. Just very creepy stuff in this movie. I love it. I'm gonna watch it again soon because I enjoyed it and forgotten how much I liked it.
It is really good, and it's a top recommend there. Again, if you're gonna do the series and you don't feel like you want to watch through all the dreck of the series, then all you really need to do is watch 1, 3, and 7, which, by coincidence, isn't just the only ones that have Wes Craven involved in any respect.
but I'm noticing a trend here.
It's also the only ones that have Heather Langenkamp involved.
Yep. Yeah. One of the Scream queens of this franchise, and you got to give her credit where credit's due.
And it's interesting because she's remained in horror, even if you don't see her acting very often. She opened, I believe, with her husband, a creature effects studio. And I think even her husband was involved in New Nightmare, if I'm not mistaken, remembering that, as one of the creature effects guys. So, like, she got her roots here, and she's remained in the industry because she likes it. She's good at it. So
yeah, stick what you know, stay in your lane, and do it well. Why not?
Yep. Freddy versus Jason came out, and we have already discussed this. That was the next movie in the series, and it's fine.
It's fine. It gives you those two titans going up against each other, and Freddy. That really, again, getting back to Freddy, pulling the strings, puppet master, getting Jason to do the dirty work for him.
It's a good way of doing it.
Yeah, he does a good job. I'll give him that.
Yep.
But it belongs in the realm, I guess, but it's not part of the franchise, in my opinion.
No, it feels much closer in like style and intent on the Friday the 13th side than it does on like the good of the Nightmare side, and that's because it feels much more like a bad Nightmare movie than a good one with Wes Craven involved, because he wasn't.
Right, exactly.
Because he wasn't.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, okay, I'm torn on the last one because it's not exactly a shot for shot, but it's basically a scene for scene remake. The 2010 Nightmare on Elm Street is just a remake of the first one, and they don't really change anything. It does similar sequences, it does similar kills, it does all the same backstory. But at the same time, if you're not going to bring Robert Englund back as Freddy, who is iconic as Freddy and does such good work in the role even when given absolute garbage, Jackie Earle Haley was a absolutely inspired choice for the role.
Yeah, very good choice. Great horror roles to his credit as well. And very scary. Iconic actor. He is.
He's
and
scary.
I thought he did a good if Robert Englund wasn't Freddy, I could see this being like, a new generation's Freddy. I could see it. He did the role justice. The movie was good in its own right. It wasn't great, but I mean, when you try to copy the original that's already, quite good, and try to just, maybe interject some, modernization to it and whatnot, it does an okay job. But I mean, to your point, how do you have a Freddy movie without Freddy?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I don't like if you watch it on its own in its own right, and I did when I watched it. I watched it separately from everything else the first time just to give it its own vibe. I didn't try and catch up with the series because they were saying it was a remake. Why bother watching anything else? So it stands alone decently well. It stands alone as a photocopy, and that's because that's what it is. Aside from Jackie Earle Haley as like Freddy, who puts his own spin on the role, and to his credit, he's fantastic.
Right.
Because it's a photocopy in all other respects, though, you're sitting there going, I've seen this. I feel like I've seen this before. There's no mystery here. I've seen this. If you didn't see any of the movies beforehand and you went in only to watch this one, it's good. It's a good Nightmare. But if you've seen the first one, you're sitting there going, you didn't. It's not like with for the Friday the 13th where they did a quote-unquote remake and retold the opening and then gave you a new adventure with Jason. This is just a photocopy.
Yeah, it's the same thing, just 20 plus years later, revamped. It's done well, and I think to your point, if you watch this in its own little, vacuum here, it's a good movie. It's a scary movie. Freddy is menacing, and I think does a really good job in this movie. But it's tough to really be a huge fan of something that was just, like you said, almost a carbon copy of the original, not quite scene for scene, but basically, tit for tat.
Yeah.
So it's okay like that. I mean, it's fine, but on its own, it's a good movie. It belongs as one of the better movies in the franchise, but I think this one kind of almost has to stand over to the side, at the kids' table on its own.
It does. It gets a kids' table at the Saturday morning cartoon version of Freddy 6. Oh, well. It's credit to Jackie Earle Haley. I feel bad that he got stuck with this movie for his performance as Freddy.
It wasn't him.
It wasn't him.
It wasn't him. He was good.
You get the vibe they would have done something different for the sequel had a sequel happened, but it didn't. So
and we're coming up on 13 years since that last one. Maybe soon. I mean, these things come and go. We'll see what they do.
Maybe
we'll see.
Release the Haley cut of Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Damn it!
But do it better this time.
But with that, this has been Not So Live from Asteroid G. Not stalking your nightmares, we swear, but maybe we are, and just ignore the claw hand that we have. I'm Mike Finkelstein.
And I'm your buddy Mike. I'll see you next time, bitch.
Have a good night, everyone.